The New York Giants had a disappointing 2024 season, finishing the season with a 3-14 record and getting blown out week after week. So in this video, I want to attempt to try and do a full mock offseason video for the New York Giants to see if we can fix this team in just one offseason. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into it. So the way this video is going to work is, as I mentioned, we are going to be doing a full mock offseason for the New York Giants. That includes everything to do with their assets, their finances, their draft picks, so on and so forth. Then we'll go over their free agents and talk about who we will resign and who we're going to let go to another team. Then we'll talk about some positional needs, primarily the quarterback position. And then we'll go over my full free agency plan as well as 2 3-round mock drafts. With that all said, we are going to begin with the team assets portion of the video. Now, fortunately for the New York Giants, because they are a bad team, they have a good amount of assets to actually work with, working right now with $43 million via over the cap with around 8 draft picks. With that money, we can go out there and sign a lot of really high value free agents, as well as keeping a little bit of extra money to pay our guys. Now, $43 million is a lot to work with, but for my personal free agency plan and who I want to bring back on this team, we're going to need to open up a few extra millions of dollars to just open up the cap space a tad more. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually give out an extension, which actually will give us a little bit of extra money to work with in 2025, although it will affect our cap space in 2026 and beyond, so you do have to keep that in mind. The contract that I will be extending is going to be Kayvon Thibodeau. The early portion of his season wasn't very good, but the back half of the season was a little bit better. I believe he finished the year with around 6 sacks, and you drafted him high in the past couple drafts, so you're going to want to bring him back, or else you're kind of admitting defeat on him. While I don't think he's going to get a massive contract, and I'm not going to necessarily say how much I would actually give him, I'm going to project him to make approximately a similar amount to Rashawn Gary of the Green Bay Packers. He's somebody who didn't have 10 plus sacks, although Kayvon Thibodeau did, but they're similar players, and I think that they're valued around the same. So again, this is just a projection, but I'm going to say approximately 4 years, $90 to $96 million. Again, that doesn't really affect this video that much. But in terms of the earnings that we'll actually get from this 2025 offseason, it's going to be approximately around $3 million, again, via over the cap. So after extending Kayvon Thibodeau, we now have around $46 million in cap space to work with, but I'm not done. I do also want to restructure the deal of Brian Burns. This will actually open us about $16 million, again, via over the cap. So by restructuring and extending Kayvon Thibodeau, we have grown approximately around an extra $19 million in cap space, opening up from 43 now to 62. I looked around to see if maybe there were some guys who we could potentially cut who just aren't valuable on this team anymore. And truth be told, there are some names you could throw out there, but I didn't really view any of them as being necessarily a good cut candidate because most of them are still good players or they just don't give us any sort of benefits. So in terms of team assets, we went from $43 million now to $19 million, including an extension to Kayvon Thibodeau and restructuring the deal of Brian Burns. Let's go ahead and now move on to our next section. So that then brings us to our team free agent section. This is where we're going to talk about all of the New York Giants free agents, who I would bring back and, well, who I wouldn't bring back. This team actually does have a good amount of free agents, but the big key free agents that everyone should be talking about are safety Jason Pinnock, offensive tackle Chris Hubbard, offensive guard Aaron Stinney, edge Azeez Ojulari, cornerback Adoree Jackson, guard Greg Van Roten, punter Jamie Gillen, linebacker Isaiah Simmons, quarterback Drew Luck, and wide receiver Darius Slayton. Of those names, the big name guys that I would assume that most Giants fans and most NFL fans know about is Darius Slayton, Isaiah Simmons, and probably Azeez Ojulari. With that said, I don't really view a lot of those guys as being valuable assets, nor do I view a lot of those guys as being players who would actually want to return to the New York Giants. While I like Jason Pinnock, I don't know if I would pay him as much because he's probably going to get a big contract, and I just don't know if I'm going to pay him that money right now, especially when you have young guys like Tyler Nubin, who played pretty good this year. So because of that, I'm going to let a lot of these guys walk. The only players of that group of guys that I just talked about and of the free agency class that I would realistically bring back is Isaiah Simmons, and I would bring him back on a 2-year, $5-ish million contract. He's a versatile piece who can play corner, safety, linebacker, edge. He's a valuable commodity, and I think you want to keep him in some capacity. I would also bring back Aaron Stinney on just a 1-year, approximately $1 to $2 million deal. He's just a rotational backup guard. I don't think you can go wrong with that. I would also bring back your punter, Jamie Gillen, on a 2-year, $2 million deal. I didn't mention this earlier, but their long snapper is also on free agency. I would also bring him back on like a 2-year, $1.5 million deal. But in terms of Darius Slayton, I don't think Darius Slayton is going to return to the New York Giants, even if they did offer him a contract. I also do think that he will be valued pretty highly in this free agency class, so I just don't think that the Giants should overpay on a wide receiver who you can probably replace in free agency or the draft. And that's kind of the same sentiment I have about Jason Pinnock. Sure, he had a pretty good year this year, but you could probably find somebody better. And when it comes to Greg Van Roten, who is also a bit of a valuable commodity for this team, he's a little bit older, and to be honest with you, I think this team should go a little bit younger on the offensive line, so I didn't view him as that much of a priority either. So after signing Isaiah Simmons, Aaron Stinney, Jamie Gilman, and the long snapper, we went from around $62 million to, I'm rounding up here, approximately $57 million in cap space. Had we brought back Jason Pinnock and Darius Slayton, we'd probably be working with probably less than $40 million, so keeping those guys off the team is probably for the best of the New York Giants. But that will bring us to maybe the most interesting part of this video, the team needs section. Of course, we're going to talk about the quarterback, but before we actually talk about the quarterback, because I actually think that this is going to be a controversial point that I'm going to do in this video, but we'll get to that point here in a second. Some of their other team needs are cornerback, I think a wide receiver too, especially if Darius Slayton is not back, interior defensive lineman alongside Dexter Lawrence, offensive line depth, and maybe it would be nice to have a better tight end, but Theo Johnson did show a little bit of something, so maybe you want to just stick it out with him. Let's talk about the quarterback position, because that is going to be the one that most Giants fans are going to have a lot of questions about. Now, unfortunately for the New York Giants, they have the 3rd overall pick, behind the Cleveland Browns at number 2 and the Tennessee Titans at number 1. More than likely, both those teams will be interested or probably drafting a quarterback in this year's draft class, and unfortunately for the New York Giants, barring some sort of shocking Drew Aller commitment to the NFL draft, you're probably going to have a hard time getting one of the top 2 quarterbacks in this class. Right now, the 2 quarterbacks who are most likely going to go in the 1st round are Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. Now, do I personally think that they are worth the number 1 and number 2 overall pick? No, but these are 2 teams that kind of have to take a quarterback, or else you're working with Will Levis and Dorian Thompson-Robinson again, so just don't see that being a realistic possibility. So for the New York Giants, when it comes to drafting a quarterback, you're either going to have to trade up a pick or 2, which shouldn't be terribly expensive, but do you really want to trade up for 2 quarterbacks that I don't really know are truly worth it? Or you could potentially draft a quarterback later in the draft via maybe 2nd or 3rd round picks. Now in the 2nd round or 3rd round or beyond, you're looking at guys like Dylan Gabriel, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, who I've heard a lot of scouts like, so those guys could be taken, but do you really want to bank your team's future on Quinn Ewers or Jackson Dart? I don't really think you should nor want to. So this draft class, because they won those couple games late in the season, they kind of screwed themselves out of a potential 1st overall pick to draft the quarterback that they want. So if you look outside of the draft and you look at free agency, there's not a lot of big name guys that you're going to realistically want to get. Because sure, you can go after Sam Darnold, but I would be pretty surprised if Minnesota let the guy walk. I think Minnesota is likely to bring him back. Then the other quarterbacks you're talking about are guys like Mac Jones, Jameis Winston, maybe Russell Wilson, depending on what the Steelers decide to do, Mason Rudolph, Jacoby Brissett, Andy Dalton, Marcus Mariota, maybe Justin Fields, but again, what is Pittsburgh going to do there? All of those quarterbacks should not be starting quarterbacks in the NFL, at least in my opinion. So I don't suspect that Brian Daboll is going to go after any of these quarterbacks unless Sam Darnold actually does want to leave Minnesota, which I would be truly shocked if he actually did. Now, there are a couple other guys who you could potentially trade for, but again, this is going to be difficult. We talked about Justin Fields. I don't know if Brian Daboll realistically wants Justin Fields, but Justin Fields is also out there potentially to get traded for from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then there's Will Levis, who has shown flashes here and there and has been good at times, and I think could be a good quarterback in the NFL, but are you really banking your job if you're Brian Daboll and Shane on Will Levis? I don't think you are. There's also Joe Milton, who I kind of like Joe Milton, not going to lie. There's JJ McCarthy, but again, kind of similar to Sam Darnold. I would be stunned if the Minnesota Vikings were to trade JJ McCarthy. It just really wouldn't make much sense. If I'm personally the Minnesota Vikings, I'm rocking another year of Sam Darnold while letting JJ McCarthy learn behind him. And then after 2 to 3 years, putting JJ McCarthy in at starting quarterback. So that doesn't make much sense either. The only other quarterback that I even think might be on the market next year is Aaron Rodgers and Geno Smith. But do those quarterbacks make any sense to the New York Giants? Maybe Geno Smith, but I don't think Seattle's going to let him go. So your realistic options at quarterback are Joe Milton, maybe Aaron Rodgers, maybe Russell Wilson, bringing back Daniel Jones, which you're not going to do, trading for Justin Fields, and maybe Trey Lance, who I haven't talked about yet. All those options aren't very good, but there's one I do like. We'll get to him in a second. Now, talking about the cornerback position here, your cornerbacks aren't particularly good, but you have some young guys who you were hoping were going to develop. Now, Drew Phillips came in last year and actually turned out to be a pretty solid cornerback for you, arguably your best corner, but guys like Cordell Flott and Adoree Jackson and Deonte Banks really disappointed last year, primarily Deonte Banks. Banks had a pretty decent rookie season, and then last year just looked like he didn't care at times. It was really bizarre, and some good things were said in the media, and I do think that he will bounce back. I'm not ready to just give up on him yet, but it was a pretty disappointing season. Then there's Cordell Flott. He's just really inconsistent. He'll have a couple good reps here and there, and then just some god-awful reps. Now, I do know that there are some people who think very highly of Cordell Flott and think he can develop to become a really good cornerback 2 alongside a cornerback 1, but I'm just not sold on him. And if you're the New York Giants and you want to compete, I think you have to find an upgrade in that positional room. Then wide receiver, obviously Malik Nabers is a total stud. I don't think Darius Slayton is going to return, so your second wide receiver alongside Malik Nabers is Wan'Dale Robinson right now, Jalen Hyatt, and that's really it. So outside of Malik Nabers, you have to find some help in that receiving room. We talked about the interior defensive line. Right now, outside of Dexter Lawrence, you're talking about guys like Armand Watts, Jordan Riley, Elijah Chapman, Corey Durden. I mean, none of those guys are all that particularly good. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence is a freaking superstar, but you want to give him some help. I do believe this team typically runs a 3-4, but you want to find some guys who can play alongside him and play with him, give him some rest. Interior defensive line will be a priority in the offseason. We talked about offensive line depth. Now, I think your tackles you're pretty set on because your left tackle is going to be, of course, Andrew Thomas. Then your right tackle is probably going to be Jermaine Illuminor. Then the interior of your offensive line, you're going to have John Runyon as probably your left guard, John Michael Schmitz as your center, who kind of had a disappointing sophomore season. Hopefully he can bounce back in his third year. And then for our right guard, we brought back Aaron Stinney, but I don't think he should be your starter. We let Greg Van Roten go, so we're probably going to need to find a right guard who can play this year. And then we talked about the tight end room. Right now, Theo Johnson is on IR, but I thought he had a pretty good and decent rookie season with just over 300 yards. Again, he did deal with some injuries, so maybe he could be the guy. Outside of him, though, of course, you have Daniel Bellinger. You have Chris Manhertz, who is also a free agent, who I didn't bring back personally. And, of course, Greg Dulcich. If you can find a realistic upgrade, like, I don't know, a Tyler Warren falls to the second round, sure, you'd probably take him, but I'm not taking Gunnar Helm or Mason Taylor in the second round because of all their other needs, so more than likely, you're probably rocking with Theo Johnson at tight end, and truth be told, I'm okay with that. So here we go. Let's go ahead and now move on to the free agency portion of the video. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I'll be really quick, but I have started a brand new YouTube channel called Metro Stories. On this channel, we simply focus on actual stories of NFL teams and NFL players. So if that sort of stuff interests you, make sure to go ahead and check it out. It'll be in the description below as well as in the pinned comment. Go ahead and check it out. I think you might like it. Let's get back to the video though. And the first thing that I'm going to do is address the quarterback position. Again, I talked about all the options. Are you going to trade up in the first round to take a Shedeur or Cam Ward? I don't think that the Browns nor the Titans would do so. And honestly, I don't think the Giants really should, to be honest with you. I don't really view either one of those quarterbacks as like generational top tier talents like a Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow coming out of college. I just think these quarterbacks are good, but not great. So if I'm the New York Giants, why would I waste assets on a quarterback that probably isn't going to be a superstar? I could end up regretting that statement later, but that's just how I view him right now. So I don't think you trade up for him. And then when you look at free agency and you look at all these other options, I'm just not really seeing that many good young players who I think would fit Brian Daboll's system. Again, if JJ McCarthy is available, I think you trade for him, but I don't think he is. So that then leaves me with Will Levis, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, or Joe Milton. And I'm going to throw this out there. I kind of think Joe Milton might be an awesome fit for the New York Giants. Now, again, I think this is going to be extremely controversial. I think some Giants fans are going to love the idea of Joe Milton, while other Giants fans are like, Metro, this is the dumbest thing ever. Why would you not just trade up and get a quarterback? Realistically speaking, I don't know if those teams are going to allow you to trade up, so this is probably the best case scenario in my opinion. Now, Joe Milton only played one game for the Patriots, and I thought he looked pretty good in that game. He was a little bit dynamic. The play action game was pretty nice. Granted, he was going up against some backups, but I thought he looked pretty good out there. But truth be told, the reason why I really like him for the New York Giants is, well, who was Brian Daboll's quarterback for the Buffalo Bills? Josh Allen, a strong-armed quarterback that was a decent decision maker, but was a bit of a baller. What's Joe Milton? Maybe lax in decision making, accuracy is a little inconsistent, footwork is a little messy, but he's a baller. He's a gamer, has strong arms. Get him out of the pocket, let him roll. He's going to make some mistakes, but he also might make a 50-yard touchdown down the field. These are all things that Daniel Jones and Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito have all been lacking. Those guys didn't have the baller mentality. They weren't playmakers. Joe Milton could be that guy. I also think for Joe Milton, trading for him is very inexpensive. Maybe a 4th round pick at most, probably more likely like a 5th round pick in all reality. Now the question would be, do the Patriots actually want to trade him? Maybe. Obviously they have their franchise quarterback, so if you can give them a 4th round pick, they'd probably end up taking the deal. But I personally view Joe Milton as a developmental piece for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen to try to develop and become the quarterback of the future. And hey, if it doesn't work out, well, at least you tried a young quarterback, and 2026 is going to be a lot of better quarterbacks out there in the draft class, at least you would hope. And for all we know, this might actually end up being a really good trade. Again, Joe Milton has a lot of issues. I think his footwork is pretty god-awful at times, but has been coming better. I thought he actually looked pretty good against the Bills in their final game. He has an incredible arm that sometimes you have to hone in. His decision-making can be a little bit dicey, but you give the dude a few years to develop, he might be something pretty nice. Again, he was a late-round draft pick for the Patriots for a reason. He's got a lot of time to develop and a lot of things that he needs to work on, but you give him the starting quarterback position for the New York Giants, I don't hate it. I also maybe think that you still could draft a quarterback like a Jackson Dart or Dylan Gabriel or Jalen Milroe later in the draft, so those are all good ideas as well. So in this mock offseason, I'm going to trade for Joe Milton because I think he could be the guy for Brian Daboll. Again, I think that might be a 50-50 split and some people are really going to hate it, but I just wanted to throw it out there. Outside of the quarterback room though, I actually really do like my free agency plan for this team. I wanted to bring in some proven vets while also going out there and getting some depth in certain positions. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the big fish, the big guy who I really wanted to get for this New York Giants team, and that was cornerback Carlton Davis. Now, Carlton Davis is having a really good season for the Detroit Lions. His PFF grades are really good. He's been a reliable corner throughout most of his career, and I do think that he would be the veteran guy that the New York Giants could really use. And you have Deonte Banks, you have Cordell Flott, you of course have Drew Phillips. Those guys are probably still going to be in the rotation and still trying to get some playing time. Adding a guy like Carlton Davis would bring a veteran guy who you can actually rely upon on big third down plays, and you could bench Cordell Flott here and there, but he could still rotate in with Deonte Banks and still find time on the field. Now, Carlton Davis won't be cheap, and I actually don't know if he would sign with the New York Giants. Now, maybe he returns to the Detroit Lions, but I'm willing to try and give him a decent-sized contract. I did as much research as I could on how much he might cost, and certain websites will tell you he's worth up to $15 million. Other will tell you that he's worth around $10 million. I went on the upper half of this one because I do think that he's worth the money, number one. And number two, I do think the New York Giants might have to pay a little bit of extra money. So in this situation, I'm going to give him a 3-year deal worth around $52 to $54 million a year. That would put him approximately 17 to 18 to 19 million APY. I think that he is truly worth it. He's a veteran guy who you could add to your secondary alongside your young players, and I think he'd be an impactful player right away. Then I wanted to address the offensive line. Again, Greg Van Roten is not on the team in my personal opinion, so in that situation, I wanted to bring in, yet again, another veteran offensive lineman who isn't going to cost me a crap ton, and that was Dalton Reisner of the Minnesota Vikings. I believe we can get him on a 2-year, $8 to $10 million contract. Again, contracts are really difficult because you think you can get them for cheap, and then they end up going for a crap ton. So again, I try to do my best with his current cap space. He isn't costing the Minnesota Vikings a ton, so I went a little bit higher than maybe I should have, but around $4 to $5 million a year. Reisner's a consistent offensive guard, and again, I think the offensive line would look really, really solid with Thomas and Luminor, John Michael Schmitz, John Runyon, and then Dalton Reisner. I think that offensive line is pretty dang good, pretty darn good, especially for a young quarterback. Then I wanted to address the interior of the defensive line. Now, unfortunately, I didn't really find too many names that I was really blown away with, but one guy's having a bit of a career year, and I think he would actually provide a lot of really good things to this team, and that's going to be Poona Ford on a 2-year, $18 million deal. Now, Poona Ford will likely take over the role of some guys like Rakeem Nunez-Roches or Elijah Chapman as the starter, but of course, we have a rotation of guys. Those guys will get plenty of playing time as well. Poona Ford, to me, is somebody who is just a really steady, solid player. He's somebody who can stuff the run at a high level while also being a pretty decent pass rusher for his size. Now, when you look at him, he's only 5'11", which for a defensive tackle isn't terribly impressive, but you turn on the film, you look at his grades, you look at his statistics, the dude is a genuine baller, and you put him alongside Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Brian Burns, and you truly would have a defensive line that is probably the best in the country. He's also not terribly expensive. Again, only 2 years, $18 million. That puts him around $9 million a year. That's a competitive wage. I also think that he's really worth the contract, and I think he would sign for the Giants for around that much. But then outside of that, after that, I kind of just went for veteran guys who I think could be some starters here and there, rotational pieces, but not necessarily like your long-term solutions. The first player I brought in was Mike Williams on a 1-year, $2 million deal. Obviously, his prime is probably behind him. He had 1,000 yards for the LA Chargers a few years ago, but injuries have sort of derailed his career. The reason, though, why I did bring him in is because obviously you have Malik Neighbors, who isn't the tallest dude in the world. Of course, Wando Robinson surely isn't, and Jalen Hyatt isn't either. So I wanted a receiver who can win those 50-50 balls down the field if you give him an opportunity. He's extremely tall. Obviously, athleticism, route running isn't really in his forte, but on a 1-year, $2 million deal, you let him go out there and make a couple highlight catches here and there, gives you some veteran depth and some leadership. I thought it was a smart move. Then I'm not necessarily sure if I'm 100% sold on this, but I did want to bring in a veteran quarterback to add to your quarterback room, because right now our quarterback room is just Joe Milton and more than likely Tommy DeVito. So I wanted to bring in a guy who potentially could be a starter in this team if necessary, but more than likely will be your backup, and that was Jarrett Stidham. He's going to kind of play the role of like a better Jacoby Brissett, Drew Lock type of guy for this Giants team. I brought him in on a 2-year, $10 million deal. Again, we're probably going to draft a quarterback in the later portions of the draft, but because I did view him as a veteran who would be a nice presence in the locker room, I thought he'd be a nice fit. Obviously, he played for Sean Payton and was behind Bo Nix, and I think it turned out pretty well for him. Then I wanted to bring in another safety alongside what you already have in, of course, Dane Belton and Tyler Nubin. So I went ahead and brought in Quandre Diggs on a 1-year, $4 million deal. Now, Quandre, when healthy, was actually having a pretty good season, but unfortunately did deal with a bit of injuries throughout his year. And honestly has been dealing with injuries these past couple years. But when he is healthy, he's a pretty productive veteran who I think you can rely upon in a pinch and probably will be in your starting lineup day one unless you can find somebody in the draft. I personally viewed this as like just adding a veteran in your safety room alongside some young guys. I wanted somebody who is proven, is a good caliber player, but isn't a long-term solution. And I think Quandre Diggs is, again, a 1-year, $4 million deal. So after all the money that we spent, we went ahead and got Joe Milton, we went ahead and got Carlton Davis, Dalton Reisner, Poona Ford, Mike Williams, Jarrett Stidham, and Quandre Diggs. After all those, contracts were put into the mix, we're working with now from $57 million approximately to approximately around $16 million left. Now with those $16 million, I'm just going to allocate that to bonuses, to your draft, to so on and so forth. So I don't think that they're going to be terribly aggressive in pursuing that many more free agents, though of course you might go out there and sign a couple veterans, some depth options, and guys like that. But with that all said, let's now move on to the mock drafts portion of the video. But as you can see, we are on the PFF mock draft simulator. We are going to be doing 2 3-round mock drafts. I won't go into extremely deep detail because we've already talked about a lot of these things and what they should do in the hypothetical offseason. So in this situation, Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders, like I expected, did go first and second overall. I think in this situation, you take the best overall player. Also out of positional need, he can play both wide receiver and cornerback on this team. I think Travis Hunter would be an incredible pickup for this roster. Now, because we went ahead and took Travis Hunter, while I would love to take Jahdae Barron or Siobhan Revel, it just doesn't make much sense for this team to do so because you already found your cornerback or your corner of the future. I think in this situation, you could potentially be looking at adding a wide receiver. Of the names here, I do like Matthew Golden, but he doesn't give you the size element that I'm really looking for. Obviously, Travis Hunter will play some receiver, but I don't think he'll play a ton. Savion Williams does give you the size, but the production is very limited. He is a bit of a project player, and I think this Giants team needs some guys who can immediately step in and play at a high level. I like Xavier Restrepo, but again, lacks the size, sort of does what Wan'Dale Robinson already does. In this situation, Jaden Higgins is probably the guy I'm going to end up going with here. 6'4", 215 pounds, is a good jump ball guy, does lack a little bit of that long field speed, but does have good enough ball skills, catching ability to go out there and make some big plays. He'll fill in sort of the Darius Slayton role on this roster. Again, you already took Travis Hunter, who I think will be a full-time corner, but he also could fill in at wide receiver here and there. Now we're in the third round. We went ahead and took a wide receiver. We also went ahead and took the cornerback. I think next thing that I'm looking for is potentially an interior defensive lineman to give us even more depth in that position room. Again, Poona Ford's only on a 2-year deal. Dexter Lawrence will be your long-term guy, but you want to have even more young developmental pieces who can kind of be in the wings and be a future guy for this team. Now, Deon Walker's available, also Derek Harmon. I don't know if in a actual draft setting, if either one of these guys will be available, but I think if Deon Walker was here, I would probably take him over Derek Harmon. I'm not terribly high on Derek Harmon, although I do like the guy. I'm a little bit higher on Deon Walker. 6'6", 345 pounds. Last year had 8 sacks. This year had 4 sacks. This is a guy who has some pass rushing capabilities, so we're going to go ahead and take Deon Walker to add a bit more in the trenches. But that concludes our first of our 3-round mock drafts. Let's go ahead and knock out my second one now. So again, in this scenario, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders were taken 1 and 2. I'm going to take some different players in this mock draft so that we just don't go down the same rabbit hole of taking Travis Hunter. Again, if it was up to me, I'm personally taking Travis Hunter. But in this situation, because both the quarterbacks are off the board, there's actually a lot of really interesting players that we could look at. Guys like Ted McMillan could really give you a dynamic weapon alongside Malik Neighbors. Mason Graham gives you that interior defensive lineman that I think makes a bunch of sense alongside Dexter Lawrence. Will Johnson, Ashton Jeanty, Malachi Starks, Luther Burden, Nick Scourton, Jalen Walker, all these guys make a lot of sense for this team. But because we are investing in a young quarterback in Joe Milton and potentially taking a quarterback later in this mock draft, I think it's important that we shore up the offense as much as we physically can. And I think by taking Ted McMillan, you're giving yourself the Jamar Chase and T. Higgins combination that Cincinnati has had for many years now. With Ted McMillan and Malik Neighbors, I think that would give you one of the best young receiving cores in the country. So I'm going to go ahead and take Ted McMillan, although I do love Mason Graham and Will Johnson here. I think they might be better prospects, but I just really love the idea of taking Ted McMillan. He's long, lengthy, can win jump balls, is a solid enough route runner, has really good hands. I love the way that he attacks the football. He's not a body catcher. He uses his hands. He can make some ridiculous catches. Just go watch the film. His hands are elite. But because we took the receiver in the first round, Jahdae Barron is now available. I also do like Walter Nolan a lot too, but of the two players, I do prefer Jahdae Barron. You also could take a Wyatt Milam to be, kind of in the depth options for your offensive line, especially with some veterans who have a little bit of some injury past, like John Runyon. So those three guys make a lot of sense. Of those three guys, I'm a huge fan of Jahdae Barron. He can play safety, he can play nickel, he can play outside corner, you can put him inside the box. He's a little bit undersized, not necessarily having incredible measurables at 5'11", 200 pounds, but he's a willing tackler. Not necessarily the fastest guy in the world, but in my opinion has enough speed. If you guys watch this dude's tape, I think he has incredible instincts, incredible anticipation. I think he's a baller. I'm going to go with Jahdae Barron. I think that he's honestly worth a first-round pick. I think Walter Nolan is just a tad bit inconsistent right now. And then for Wyatt Milam, while I like the player and I think he's worth arguably a first-round pick, I just think for this team, you got to find impactful players who can play immediately. And I think Jahdae Barron could be that guy. Now, because in our last mock draft I didn't take a quarterback. I think this time it might be the right time to take quarterbacks. All of the quarterbacks who I talked about earlier are still on the board. Dylan Gabriel, Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, even Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, even, I don't know where Jackson Dart is, but Jackson Dart is down here. I think that he probably goes a little bit higher than that. Outside of the quarterbacks, there are some other really good players. Cameron Williams is still available. He's arguably a first-round pick. I don't think he'll be on the board, but if he is, I think he could be an incredible developmental tackle to sit behind Andrew Thomas or Jermaine Illuminor for a few years. I also think adding a safety like Kevin Winston or Lathan Ransom also make a ton of sense. You could even go with the defensive interior guy like Deion Walker again. But again, to kind of mix it up here, you do have Joe Milton, but I want to give him some competition in the quarterback room. Now, of the guys here, I just don't think Jalen Milroe is going to be available, so I'm not going to take him here because I don't think he's going to be available. I could see Jalen Milroe sneaking back up into the first or early second round just because of how athletic and how raw he is. But I do really like the idea of Dylan Gabriel and Quinn Ewers. This one's tough because I think Dylan Gabriel might be a little bit more pro-ready, but maybe has a bit of a limited ceiling in terms of how good he can be. I think at his best, you're talking about a Tua Tagovailoa guy with maybe arguably a little bit better legs, but maybe not as good of anticipation, but has decent arm strength, but not necessarily the greatest. Decision making is pretty solid. He isn't going to put the ball in harm's way. Can make a couple plays here and there, but more of a college quarterback. But Quinn Ewers gives you a developmental guy with a strong arm. I think his anticipation needs work. I think his footwork needs a lot of work, but he has a lot of the same similar qualities that I think Brian Daboll might like. The only thing with Quinn Ewers that I don't like is he has next to no playmaking ability, and I think that is something that Dylan Gabriel does give you a bit, so I think I'm going to go ahead and take Dylan Gabriel in this scenario. So that then concludes our second third round mock draft. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, what would you guys do in a hypothetical mock offseason for the New York Giants? And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.